Yes, we are live and we have some people
We are
actually. So
live. Maybe
great.
I was still in like the test room, which looks exactly like this. But
Well,
when in the test room, there was a thing that said, "Come join live." Anyways,
it's
there
working
you go.
now. Good. Yay.
Thanks,
So
Steve.
welcome everybody. After that rough start, we hope that we're going to have a smooth conversation, or at least that no blood
I
will be
think so.
spilled. So this is exciting because we are very, very far from each other, at least geographically.
We
If
are
my
indeed.
spirit. I'm in Portugal and Dan is in New Zealand. So it was a
Yep.
little tricky to find a time that this would work. It's late evening where I am and early morning where he is. But thank you very much, Dan, for this idea and for agreeing to talk to me.
I'm
So
absolutely delighted to be here. This is cool. I've been seeing these passing around on the Substack and
mhm,
thinking, boy, that looks like fun.
yeah,
And when you're writing, when you're posting, all of us on the Substack being little content machines that we are,
mhm,
um, that can feel kind of I don't know, lonely is the word, but it can feel like an independent sort of thing.
yeah,
And I've really found myself in my own writing and Substack process reaching the point where it's like, man, I just want to talk to folks. Let's talk to
yeah,
people.
yeah. I
So
think
here we are.
Substack is very seductive in that sense because it turns, it appeals to writers as human beings who need to connect with other people in other ways than just writing. So it
Yeah,
pulls us
that's true.
out of our dens and gets us talking to each other, which is great. That's
Always connect.
about it. So we are here today to talk about the topic. The title we've chosen is "Will We Die as Americans?" Hopefully, we'll
Mhm.
be talking more about being American than about death. Um,
Let's keep it light.
yeah.
Mhm.
But I think this is a great topic for me to talk to Dan about because we have both been writing for several months now about some of the same themes, including alienation, being an outsider, establishing identity, not being certain about who you are. And Dan writes very beautifully and sometimes hauntingly about these topics. So I'm very happy to get a chance to talk to you, Dan.
I'm excited to chat with you, man. If you haven't read it, I mean, you had a couple essays there. I love all your stuff, but I go back and read the essays about, are you the kind of person who can live abroad?
Mm,
And what living abroad has done for you and has changed your life. And
mm,
I see those values infused through all your work. I love the one about just your sense of beauty there in Portugal as well. Um, there's so much. I feel like there can be so much performance in expat living and expat life, and so much writing that I've never seen it. I've never seen those ideas and thoughts and feelings written so clearly, so directly, so honestly. When I read them, I was like, "Yeah." It's easy for me to get muddled in these sort of expat poetics, and it was such a balm to read your clear and true communications you're writing about this situation, about this sort of life. So thank you, thank you.
well,
I mean, it's
thank you, Dan. I think we can end now.
pleasure.
Um, okay. I'm incredibly pleased that some of the things that I've written are touching people in that way. So I just, thank you for expressing that and help.
Thank
Uh,
you.
so let's start talking about what it means to be an American. Shall we do that?
All righty, who's a big one?
Maybe we need to give a little bit of background about our experience. So,
Sure.
I've lived on two continents for a long time. You've lived on several continents. So let's just give a very, very 20-second review there. I'll start because I'm much
Go for it.
simpler. Actually, I've done far less interesting stuff than you have. I've lived about a third of my life in the United States, or maybe half of my life in the United States, and then the other half here in Europe. So I have lived in Sweden, Portugal, Spain, France, Germany, and Italy, and for different lengths of time. And so I see myself as partly American and partly European. So that's me, essentially. I have not lived for any length of time in any other part of the world. But Dan,
Well, this is why this is an interesting conversation. This is, I have also lived about half my life abroad, or most of, say, the 21st century,
hmm,
um, and I've lived everywhere well, not everywhere, but never in Europe. So besides the States, I've lived in Paraguay and Mexico and Honduras and Bolivia and China and now New Zealand. So been doing the whole expat thing. Never, but the classic expat narrative, especially here on Substack, is Americans in Europe for lots of great reasons and lots of numbers. But
Mhm.
it's a big world, and there's folks out and about everywhere. So yeah, been a while, and I mean, I don't know when was the last time you lived in the States. When you leave and not haven't have not done a chunk there since?
The last year that I lived in the US was 2007. So
Wow,
it's been quite a while for me. Um,
a long time.
yeah. And before that, I went back and forth between Europe and the US for 2 decades or so.
Wow.
Um, so
Uh, we've been out since 2013. Um, so a while, but not.
right.
Uh, well,
Let's start here. Do
okay.
you feel like an American?
Yeah, absolutely, 100%,
Okay.
100%,
Yeah.
totally
I would say
American.
the same thing. I would say I do feel like an American, but maybe not just an American, you know?
Mm, mm. Yeah.
What when I ask you about being an American, what does that conjure up? What do you think it means to be an American for you?
Um, maybe this coming from being in New Zealand, which is for a white Anglo American dude, is very there's a very close line, racially, linguistically.
Yeah.
uh, New Zealand has a settler history like ours, and so you start to enter into more subtle spaces. When I lived in China, what it meant to be American was like, well, you could spot me down the street at
Mhm.
100 yards. And here, you start moving in a space where it's much more sort of, when my first go-to answer there would be, it's much more sort of about personality or
Mhm.
vibe. You start getting into the sort of the weeds, some of those funny little quotes that would come up from de Tocqueville about like, well, I'm just optimistic or loud. I talk with my hands a lot. I was at a party. I was at a party last weekend, and I met a woman there. I was chatting with her, and she said, um, "Are you gay or just American?"
Oh my god.
Excuse me, excuse me. We went on to have some intense political discussions. Didn't necessarily see eye to eye on a lot of things. I woke up the next morning and I think it was straight up that I was using my hands to talk, and I'm not sure Kiwi masculinity is a little less performative in that sense.
Interesting.
So I associate a lot of that with being American, being sort of
Mhm.
uh, loud, hospitable, cheerful, up in your face, outgoing. Now, of course, there's plenty of Americans who aren't like that, right? But there is a general um, volume and spirit that is currently close to that's my working definition currently because of this situation. What about yourself?
I agree with a lot of that. I think that outwardly, I also have a lot of this sort of characteristics, behavioral characteristics of Americans that you described. I want to say something about the inner part though, because for me, when I ask myself, "Am I an American?" I think about what it means to feel American, right? Not just how you behave, but what you
Yep,
believe, right? So for me, for example, I think obviously if you grow up with the culture of North America, specifically the United States, that,
yep.
is part of being American and having all of those cultural references and things. I see I'm moving my hands too. So, either I'm American or I'm gay. Um, I think that believing in American exceptionalism is a part of being an American for
Yeah.
a lot of people. There's this idea that, as they say, it's the greatest country on earth. And even if you don't believe that strictly speaking, there is something about America as a concept, right?
Mhm.
The idea that we all have free will and are not
Yep.
just suffering from the hand that fate deals us, that we can work hard and that will lead to prospering. The idea that new ways of doing things are always going to be discovered. And so progress is real and something to strive for. And I think, the fact that to be part of this project, all you have to do is want to be part of it. You have to want to participate. You don't have to have any particular race, any particular gender, any particular sexual orientation, any particular biography. It's really, at least for me, America has always been the great melting pot where people can just show up and participate. And I think from that perspective, what's happening in the United States right now is extremely distressing. Uh,
Yes.
so I don't want to talk too much about that. 'Cause-
Well, I think this question of American exceptionalism, I think, particularly in the left, it gets kicked around as like this a sin, an intellectual sin that
Mhm.
we have. Um, and it's not like that. All countries, are their own little thing, and there's a lot of truth to that. But I don't. I agree with this notion that like we are raised in and end up subscribing to a country as idea more than just country as place. And what's
Right.
disturbing about current politics is this shift to a sort of blood and soil nationalism, which I think of as being much more European, honestly.
Exactly. Exactly.
And so I think this there's kind of a paradox. What's American? What the most American thing is holding a live stream to talk about what an American is, right? This is the paradox. We have this idea that we can choose our own destiny,
Uh,
right? And so we're in love with that choice, I think,
Mhm.
as Americans, and we insist upon that choice forever and ever, amen. To the point, and this is the paradox, that we insist on that choice up until the point of actually deciding not to be an American anymore. I've actually seen it. Uh, there was a line Kirsten Powers had in one of her things where she said, "Well, the most American thing is leaving America for a better life." And I'd be like, yes and no. I mean, this is the paradox. Is like it is the most American thing is to believe in the freedom to remake your life and perhaps to do so geographically. Go west, young man. Right?
Mhm.
But isn't there a finish line somewhere? Isn't there a box that you leave at some point? It isn't just an idea. It isn't just a way of being. It's a physical place
Sure.
on Earth, and the tension between those two, I do think, is uniquely American and endlessly fascinating to me. As I keep writing about it, right?
Totally agree. Totally agree. Okay, so you, I want to ask you a question. What do you want to ask me a question before I ask you the next question?
Sure. Yeah, we can bounce back and forth. Um,
Great.
I, I know you were a university lecturer, right? That's in your bio.
I
Uh,
was a university lecturer for many years.
yeah, me too. In writing, I guess you were in linguistics.
Mhm.
There is a certain element of, I guess, of the live feed, but also just running a Substack and writing that feels very teachery to me.
Oh yeah.
This is a lesson plan. So this was a trick that we used to do that I would do in my classes when we were talking about an argument or talking about an idea, a way to make the students to think critically about what they were thinking. And that's the 0 to 100 scale. So that is my question for you. You've been in Portugal how long now?
Well, I've lived here twice. I lived here back in the '90s, and now I've been living here for
Right.
all told 4 years.
All told 4 years. So in 4 years, this American self that we've just described is now in
Mm.
Portugal. How Portuguese are you now after 4 years on a scale of 0 to 100?
I would say like 10.
10%. Why?
Um, because being in a place doesn't automatically make you of that place. And I
No.
think from my perspective, to become a part of I'm not even going to say nation, but a culture, um, you have to understand and embrace that culture. And I feel like I'm working really hard to understand Portuguese culture, but there are still a lot of parts of it that are a mystery to me. And so I don't feel that I've really um, absorbed it to the extent that I could have been altered really significantly by it.
Mm.
So I would say I'm much more Swedish, for example, than
How
Portuguese
many
because
years are you there?
I lived there for over 10 years. So
Okay. Long.
I was I worked for the state. I was speaking Swedish a lot. I was much more, I would say, inculcated with Swedish values and things. So I would say I'm probably like more like 40% Swedish, or 30 to 40% Swedish, but only 10% Portuguese.
Are you still? This is the question. Does the Swede carry over, or can you feel it melting away as you move into your Portuguese life? I mean, you were just visiting Sweden again. Does it all come flooding back, or does it go away? Is national identity like riding a bike, or not?
Well, I had a sort of a bike riding experience when I was in Sweden last week because I got there and I mean, first of all, I came out of the airport and I inhaled and I said, "Oh yeah, this is Sweden." I can smell it in the air. Something
Yeah.
about the humidity and the greenery or something, and I just felt like, "Wow, I'm home." Which is kind of scary when you've decided to leave that country and move to another one, you know? And then switching back into Swedish was a joy. So, using the language came, very automatically because it hasn't been very long. I mean, I only got
Yeah.
3 years ago. Um, I think it lingers. I think it'll be a long time before I stop being Swedish at all because first of all, I still have all that the sort of the knowledge, like I could still speak Swedish and I still know lots of people there and everything. But also because I really think I took to heart a lot of the ideas of Swedish society and even ones that I maybe don't like so much. And so I think that those might be dislodged over time and replaced with other ones, but these changes aren't very quick.
No,
What
that's
about
interesting. Well, I mean, so you got a couple things in there. You got ideas, you got time. Um, I mean, I think that I think there's also just a mix of how well you pass. I mean, there is a racial and linguistic part of this.
you?
If we're asking this question, I say, how long have you been in Japan? I say, do you feel Japanese? Do you feel Chinese? The arc might be different. Um, I don't know. It's a hard question. Jenny and I were talking about this last night. I asked her that about New Zealand, and she said, same thing about 10%. You feel like there's something I haven't yet internalized.
Mhm.
Um, and I said, maybe more like 20% in New Zealand. And I think that the question there is it an adoption? How much of it is are you picking up the culture, the smells, the feeling, and how much is the sort of the shape, how well you already match the shape of the thing you're going to.
Right.
And the thing about New Zealand is it feels very open. The phrase that Paul Threw used in an editorial in New York Times a little bit ago was a loosely hung society. He was
Mhm.
talking about sort of more rigid social hierarchies of European societies or traditional non-Western societies where everybody sort of has their place.
Mhm.
um, New Zealand feels very sort of new world in the sense that it's kind of wide open. I mean, there's certainly class
Right.
and race division here, but it feels pretty baggy. It feels like a Western state in the U.S. that
Mhm.
way. Um, and so I have this notion that I could get a higher up the 100 scale with less effort or changing. It's a more question of intent and acceptance. My mates at the pub, they're like, "How long you been here?" I say 5 years, and they say, "You're Kiwi." And
That's nice.
yeah, and I said, "Well, that's lovely," but it's like I don't know. Do I feel that yet? I'm not sure. I feel that way,
Right.
and so there's that tension of like, if you're in a society that would say, "Ah, hell, you're here. You're putting your shoulder to the wheel. We don't care if you have the accent, but good on you,"
Right.
as they say here. Then you're in, and
I think
that's
that's true.
what's the case in a place like China.
Right. No.
And then there's historical narratives too. When I lived in Mexico, the most accepted, I have one of the most accepted expat moments of my life was at a bus stop in Oaxaca, Mexico, and I was talking to the old man there. I was headed up to the language school. I was teaching English as we do, um, and this old man asked me, "Where are you from?" It's in Spanish. I said, "Oh, so I'm from Texas," and he said, "Ah, eres un hermano de la República Mexicana. You're a brother of the Mexican Republic." Because, of course, Texas was Mexico. They owned it,
Course.
as they will remind you. And I was like, yeah, man, that's cool. That's cool. And so, I mean, that's a special relationship. Mexico and the United States is a very special
Sure.
relationship that way. So there's this measure, I think, of both what is happening internally and then how you read where your internal self fits in that society.
And as
And I that's radically different country to country.
Yeah, and you pointed out another really important factor, which is in a particular society, what it takes to be considered as fitting in, right? So there are countries where race is really considered important, like Japan, for example.
Yeah.
Um,
Also,
there are countries, sorry,
also China. Yeah.
also China. There are
Yeah.
countries where language is considered really, really important. You know, if you move to a particular country and learn the language, they will adopt you as one of them. There are other countries where they're very unlikely to adopt you under any circumstances. So there's all these different sort of portals by which you might enter a society and be seen as belonging to it. And
You're a linguist? Is there an example of a country that is the language one?
well, I think for example, maybe there are people even watching right now who can prove this true or false. I would say that if you moved to Slovenia and learned Slovene, they would adore you. I think if you moved to Finland and moved and learned Finnish, they would adore you. I bet that if you moved to the Basque country and learned to speak Basque, they would accept you as
Mm,
a
mm, mm.
so in other words, typically smaller countries with smaller languages, but also my experience is if you go to France and you force them to speak English to you, they will be grumpy. But if you
Yeah.
go to France, you attempt to speak French to them, they're actually very nice because they're like, look, this is our country. We speak French. If you can't be bothered to speak French, then I don't have a lot of time for you. And
Mm.
so, I think that language is actually more important than many Americans would like it to be, you know?
Yeah, that is true. Well, this goes back into that relentless quest for self reinvention, right? If it's an American thing to believe that you can be whatever you want to be,
Mhm.
it's hard to fold language into that because language is it takes work, it takes time. Some of us are just naturally better at it than others. I'm just okay. Like I've lived out in the world. I speak Spanish. I've totally failed with Mandarin, um, but that goes against our American. I don't even want to just say it's easy to say American consumer ethic. That's the put down version of it,
Uh,
but this endless reinvention, this faith in endless reinvention. Well, yeah, good. Learn the language. But learning the language is hard. Learning the
sure.
language changes you and it's uncertain and it requires a performance of being an idiot and it requires a humility
Yeah.
that is not necessarily part of our national DNA.
Although I would argue it'd be interesting if you compare it to, for example, working hard in order to climb up the economic ladder, right? Americans are typically willing to work very, very hard for a long time and be at a real disadvantage initially because they believe that they're eventually going to reach the point that they're trying to get to. And I
That's
think if they looked at language through the same lens, from the same perspective, it would actually help. That's just
true.
an idea I just had while you were talking.
That makes sense. That makes sense. You know, do the mahi
Let,
as they say in New
let's do a
Zealand.
couple more quick questions, and then maybe the people in the audience have a question. So
Sure.
somebody did ask, what percent are we as Americans? So, like, how American are you? Are you 90% American or 20% American? What would you say?
Well, I mean, so this is you do the 0 to 100 scale, and if you say it's
Hey,
bounded,
it's your idea, man. You're the one who used that.
but I like it. I like it being bounded because then you have to make some hard choices, and that's where you learn something, right? So I've already heard you say you're 10% Portuguese and maybe 30 or 40% Swedish. If those are in the suitcase at the same time, we're leaving you 50, 60%
I would
American.
I would say I'm
But
50% American at this point. Yeah.
yeah, man, mine's got to be north of 50 somewhere. And if I'm gonna say 20 Kiwi, I would like. This is why I asked you about Sweden. I would like to reserve a nice little chunk that is Mexican or that is Latin American. I'm going to do this umbrella thing that you talked about. You say, "Well, I'm European." I don't know if I don't know. Do Europeans say that, or is that just Americans living in Europe? Latin American. This pan Latin American. I want to be like, "Well, I lived in
Mhm.
a bunch of Latin American countries. I feel for
Right.
all of them in different ways." But so American wise, I'd say north of 50, and partly because to say south of 50 feels like a moment. It feels like a call. It feels like a decision, a narrative change in my life that I'm not ready to do. Now, I've met Americans here in New Zealand who are lifers. They're all in. They came down. They left. They decided they were on the out. We're restarting, and then they've left that behind. And they will tell you straight up. I've met other Americans down here who are lifers, who are all in, who are like, I'm clinging. Brad's one of them. He was just popped up there in the chat here. He said he's been here since 2008, holding on to his Americanness. And I feel like I'm more on that level. But how do you draw the line? I don't want to be forever encased in that bubble, however long we stay out.
We talked before about free will and self-determination. Do you actually think that we can decide whether we're going to be American or whether we're going to lose that identity? I mean, how much control do we really have over it?
I don't know. I think I lean more towards you can't. I lean more towards you're baked into some things. Um, Life is finite. You got an X number of days walking the earth, right? The whole energy behind cosmopolitanism, the citizen of the world thing. Now, when I taught at New York University of Shanghai, we talked
Mhm.
about that all the time. The whole point was we're cosmopolitans, right? And there's a lot of beauty in that. But I say human life is finite. You're going to spend X number of days in one country and X number of days in another and X number of days in another.
True.
That that can't but have some effect on your life total. And so when I feel like, I'm 46, I spent most of, as you say, you spent half your life in America. Like that doesn't wash away
Yeah.
in your bones and your veins and everything. But there's this maybe there is maybe this baked in on different personality types. Jenny has an aunt who went to India in the 60s as people were doing, um, and stayed in an ashram, fell in love with the Swami, and never left. Right?
Wow.
And she's now like in her 80s, much older aunt, and we've gone and visited her. She's outside Pondicherry. And so it's like she's an Indian citizen. She has Indian children, all this business. When you, when you go and meet her, of course, she talks like a small town South Dakota that she was. That is her accent. Just wonderful lady. But her commitment to that project, to being there all in, is that kind of choice. This is a radical remaking. She is, in my life, the far pole, the crazy distant example of what is possible.
Mhm.
And yet, I think this is what's interesting. When she tells the story, she tells the story about taking the bus over from Europe and through Central Asia in the 60s. This is like early Lonely Planet stuff, right? And she was traveling with a friend, and her friend was like, "Yeah, I'm going home," and she's like, "No." She felt drawn. She felt like she didn't have a choice. She felt like she was
Hmm.
going home, right? And it was this weird. We're getting into weird mystical stuff here, but like, so on one level, she goes through this massive reinvention, and has never come back to the States. Truly, in 50 years, has never come back to the States.
Never
On another
returned.
level, never returned. On another level, she is selling it as a sort of inevitability of her soul.
Mm.
That it wasn't a change so much as a revelation, which is of course the thing people talk about travel writing or traveling all the time, right? It's like, you travel to discover yourself. And I don't know if that's a change in identity or so much as a unmasking or a digging.
Yeah,
I don't
and I think that I want to connect back to something that you said a little earlier, and it just occurred to me, it's too bad we couldn't get the Pope on this live because it would have been very interesting to talk to him and see
He's
what his.
amazing. Yeah.
Um. Anyway, do you think that sometimes you find a place that is just right for you, and that you don't have to change to fit in there because it's sort of already the kind of place that you want to be in? And so maybe there are places for each of us that you don't really, you know, like your aunt maybe or Jenny's aunt, you're just trying to find the place where you're meant to be, in air quotes.
Yeah.
Um, do you believe that?
Yes. I I want to.
Mm,
I want to desperately.
mhm.
I have felt that. I think there's time and space involved. As a young man, I lived in Marfa, Texas, out in West Texas. I had a wonderful time there, made a lot of lifelong friends there. And I knew at the time, even as a floppy 23-year-old, that I had found the place that I was supposed to be in. I also knew that I was restless and wanted to travel, and I was 23. I was sure as hell not going to settle down anywhere at, 23, 24, 25. I had to go see the world. Fast forward 20 years, I don't know, like, was that a time thing or a place thing or a time and place thing or a place thing? I love to go visit. And every time I visit, I'm riven with that question of like, oh, I've come home. Oh, am I coming home to 2003 or am I coming home to a geographical coordinates on the earth? Um, and one of the questions you were talking about is like, do you believe that you can be an amalgam of different personalities, different places, and that's enough, right? And um, I want to believe that, and I keep failing to believe that. I think um, and when I read your writing, and this is the inspiration I take from your writing, I see you being out in the world and being really comfortable and really being that ideal cosmopolitan, where
Wow.
you are sincere and engaging with Portugal, with Sweden, with Europe, whatever. You're here for it. And I think language is a big part of that, but you're absolutely engaged. And yet you're kind of like, well, I am who I am and I'm this mix and it's going to be okay. And I can't get to that okayness. I love it. I love being out. Um, I would have been bored if I stayed at home. I love it, but I'm constantly like, "Where is my home?"
Mm.
To the point that Jenny's just like, "Shut up! Like we're good, man." So I don't know.
I think you're a seeker, Dan. I
Yeah,
think you're
that's a
naturally
curse.
a well, curse or a blessing.
Yeah,
The other problem is, I mean, another wrinkle here is that we change over time, right? So
yeah,
you're not the same person you were when you were 20. And so maybe the place that was right for you then is not the place that's right for you now, right?
yeah,
Which,
yeah,
is an interesting idea in light of the fact that so many people decide to retire and move to another place, the
yeah.
same.
Yes, I think that is so weird. I think that is so weird. I honestly do. San Miguel de Allende, Mexico is full of it's not full, but that particular chunk is full of the retired American thing, and I understand it. I mean, I love Mexico, and it's cheaper and it's warmer and all this stuff. I grew up in Phoenix, which was full of retired snowbirds from the Midwest and from Canada who were sick of shoveling snow, and so they left Minneapolis, they left Chicago, they came to move to Phoenix, and nobody was from there, and a great chunk of them had retired there.
Mhm.
Um, I find that I can't throw stones. I'll get to that age. We'll see. I find it very odd, and I worry about that relationship to place because I think in an American context, it starts to move back much more into the consumption version, the House Hunters International version, where it's
Mm.
like, well, I moved to the Dominican Republic because I can get a three-bedroom condo for cheap with maid service, and oh, by the way, there's a country out there that it's nice and pleasant.
Yeah,
Um,
that's one of you're hitting one of my pet peeves here.
yeah, right. And so it's not fair to put that all on all retirees. I'm just saying, once you take out the job,
Yeah.
which is how one way to engage, right? I worked at the libraries here. I'm looking for work. I'm going to get some work here in New Zealand. Once you take out the possibility of dating and marrying a local, once you take out the possibility of all the entanglements of raising children in another country, where you're whether or not you want to be, you're all in on
Mhm.
any one of the scores. You're all in on that relationship to the country and retirement. Um, Even back home, retirement can kind of be sort of a bubble if you let it. And I see it abroad being an extra bubble.
That's right. Yeah. And it's interesting that there are so many people who don't want to, when they retire, they abandon their community and seek a new one,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Because you might think that this is the time when you want to consolidate all your friendships. But Americans are funny that way. Americans are they move more easily than anybody else I know.
Hmm.
And I think
Hmm.
that makes us very special. I think actually the fact that you and I have lived in so many places makes us very American.
Hmm.
Ironically, right? It is paradoxical because it gets back to Kirsten Power's quote again, right? That, the
Hmm.
most important thing is to leave the United States because it is about looking for something better. It's about that optimism that I see as actually fundamental to being an American.
But isn't that like, isn't this overly self-congratulatory to say the most American thing is to leave America? Isn't it just to say like there's people all over the world moving all over the world?
I mean,
Is it
that's a
overly,
good
or
line,
is
I would
we're
say.
patting ourselves on the back, being like, I'm such a good American because I used the wealth and power and privilege that's been given to me as being an American to wander the earth. I believe in engagement. I believe in getting out there and being in another place. Absolutely. But I feel like there's a there's a story that we tell about ourselves that's a little bit like self-aggrandizing under that American tag
And
that
don't
I
you
don't
think
like.
that's a little bit American too, though? It's
Yeah.
being self-aggrandizing.
Yes, yes, it
I mean,
is.
that's
Maybe that's something
actually,
we could
yeah.
let go of.
We could even say that the most American thing in the world is to say that the most American thing in the world is to leave America, right? So we can one up Kirsten Power.
I feel like that's a poem. I feel like that's a poem right there.
Um, so I want to ask. Let's just ask another question, and then see if anybody in the who's watching wants to ask us anything.
Yeah. Yes, I've
Um,
seen them come and go through there. Let's do that.
yeah. So will we die as Americans? What do you think?
I mean, yeah. What is it? What's the opening of 100 Years of Solitude? Years later, as he faced the firing squad,
As you face the firing
and all the
squad,
point,
yes.
yeah, yeah,
Remember the
remember
day that they brought ice to Macabre?
brought
Yeah.
the ice. I feel like that is the great haunting. I think it is. This was your question, and I think it's a fabulous question. I think it's a great haunting expat immigrant question. Where are you going to die? Where are you going to get buried? There's a woman here that I've talked to in New Zealand a lot as American, who does sort of death counseling around that, thinking about this process. Right?
Hmm.
It's like, well, do you want to die here? Or do you want to die there? Do you want to get buried here? Or do you want to get buried there? I have a friend here who's has those discussions in her own family of like where the parents going to be buried, close to the family or close to where they're from, because in New Zealand we're talking 10,000 miles,
Yeah.
so that is, I think that is a really haunting question. And when you ask it like that, it's like, will you get to the point where you're lying on the deathbed and you say, I'm Portuguese, I'm American? Maybe the nationality doesn't come up at that time. Oh God, I hope it doesn't.
I
Like
don't
this
think it's
moment of finality of the switch.
Yeah, can I say something personal for a sec? Because and this
Yeah.
relates to this ridiculously grandiose compliment that you paid me earlier about being, truly uncomfortable with moving around in the world. I got to a point a few years ago where I suddenly realized that the question of where do I want to be buried? Do I want to be buried or cremated? All those things. I realized that it doesn't matter to me.
Wow.
And I realized that is a decision to be made by whoever I leave behind. Let them do whatever they want with my body because it's no longer my concern at that point. I
Mm.
just want to live as well as I can up until that moment when I say bye. And then it's not my problem. And if they want to put me in a cemetery here or there, okay. If they want to scatter my ashes over, from a paraglider in New Zealand, that's fine too. But honestly, I've just decided that that's one of those things that we grow up thinking are important, but it doesn't have to be. So I've just decided that that doesn't matter to me anymore. Is that
Yeah.
weird?
No, I mean that's Zen, man. That's great. That's Zen. That feels very Buddhist to me. I don't know anything about Buddhism, but
Well, I
that,
actually really do like Buddhism, so maybe I've learned something from
it's cool.
that.
But then I'll throw the curveball back the other way. It's like kids, family, legacy. I mean, this is a difference, right? And I don't. That's never a fun conversation on the internet. That's a third rail. The like kids or no kids is a whole conversation that takes over the internet in ways that I find dismaying. But I'm at the heart of my thinking about what the hell we're doing,
Mhm.
and out and about, and whether we move home and everything. It's the kids. It's the kids. Where are they going to go to school? Where are they going
Yeah.
to college? What
Yeah.
life will they have? Are they going to stay up and join this community in small town New Zealand forever? Or whatever forever looks like. All these
Mhm.
lovely people that we've met here and all these lovely friends that we met. Are they going to be Kiwis? Am I looking at a future in which one child is all in on New Zealand and the other one moves to America and their lives fork that way?
Right.
Where when they want to go to the spot where daddy is buried, or was scattered or whatever. I mean, and that I agree that feels a little looser to me. I'm not a big graveyard guy. That I've certainly gone and visited those headstones in my family, but it affects the story. It changes the story, and I
Mhm.
think you have to get to a place where um, there's not a wrong decision. And wiser people than I have said this to me as I have fretted
Yeah.
over these things. That like, there's not a wrong decision, and in that way, we're lucky. It's not like, oh, I didn't get out in time before the bombs fell. Like, it's like, I mean, maybe we're headed that way, but it's like there's a good life here and there's a good life there. And they're messy and there's trade offs, but I'm a human being. That fixation on the narrative identity is something that haunts me. Do I want to go into the books
Yeah.
as as a Kiwi? When a baseball player, when they go to the hall, what jersey do they pick?
Mhm.
Um, and that decision, I think, is mostly in a lot of ways about the kids, and about where from here for them.
Can I throw a curveball at you?
Sure.
If they were going to name a building or a road after you in some country, where would you want it to be?
Oh man. Oh man. That's oof. uh uh
I didn't prepare you for that one. I told you it was a curveball.
that's a good one. I think I am called back to West Texas for that.
Uh,
Um but you know what? I didn't live there a ton of years. I don't have old family ranch land there. And then of course, and this is the thing in New Zealand and the States, but particularly the Western United States, are very keenly aware of the sort of settler process there. So
mhm.
New Zealand is going through this thing right now where it's like we've got all the English names that were dropped on top of the Maori names, but there's plenty of places that never got an English name and still have the Maori names, and it runs in different regions of the country. So this little pocket I'm in right here, all the towns have these very British names: Featherston, Greytown, Carterton, Masterton. But
Uh,
other places in New Zealand, the names are mostly Maori, and so there's a lot of question when you go on the radio news in the morning. When I first moved here 5 years ago, they didn't say the Maori names of the cities, and then they have since started saying them. So every day when you get the forecast, which on the radio they run the whole length of the country, every name they say both ways. And then actually now I think mostly they say the Maori name first. So they say Otatahi Christchurch, um, for example. So the naming thing becomes really complicated. And I guess my answer would be, I don't feel like I deserve it anywhere.
aw, I do.
Yeah.
I think you deserve it, Clayton. I'll see what I can do about
Where?
getting
But
a
where?
street in Portugal named after you.
Oh yeah, Portugal. I love it. I love it. Do they do those little beautiful little hand painted street tiles in the corners of the streets, that kind of thing?
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Michael has been posting about that from San Miguel de Allende. Um,
Uh,
those are amazing. Um,
yes.
if any of our viewers would like to ask a question, this is a great time to do so.
Let's do it.
A lot of people have been contributing things, and I really appreciate that. We can't necessarily read them all out, but other people are probably noticing them.
Pardon me. I'm moving around and plugging in. There we go.
Mm,
Do we see? I saw some come and go there.
yeah, I'm looking here.
Somebody earlier was asking about studying. I think somebody earlier asked about studying abroad versus moving abroad.
Right.
And that was the question I had for you. Like in your list of countries, did you at one point study abroad versus like straight up just moving?
I did.
How did that feel?
My first introduction to Europe was actually when I did my junior year abroad in Spain. And that was
Mhm.
I wrote an essay about this. That was a life changing experience because I had never been to Europe before. It was my first
Mhm.
time in Europe, and I came over and spent a year, and it was just like being welcomed into a completely different world.
Mhm.
And, I felt like I'd climbed into a wardrobe or something. And suddenly there's all these crazy things. And I just loved it. And I just thought, you know what? I'm going to come back here as soon as I can. Yeah. And amazingly, I did. So I engineered things so that I could move back to Europe.
Well, but that's okay. I mean, that
So
gets
I
me.
always tell when I was a university teacher, I always told my students that if they're even considering studying abroad, they should do so, because I think there's nothing that will affect your worldview more than that, more than spending a year in another country. I think it's the most salubrious thing you can do for yourself, honestly. But you were
I
about to
I
say,
100% agree. 100% agree. Yeah. It's great because the support network. You know, you've moved many times. I've moved under very different terms.
mhm,
Um, Cold for a job, by accident,
yep,
but also through a study abroad situation. You get there, you've got such a support network. So you're young and you're open to the world, but you have a
mhm,
giant machine with you. And yes, that can be kind of a bubble, but it just means that you get to flop about and you're taken care of and you're handed that community.
yeah,
Uh, I was a foreign exchange student. I don't know if you did that. I did that as a kid.
no,
Same deal. You dropped into a family. That was Paraguay for me. God bless the Familia Brites. That's what really blew the world open for me. Spending a few months. It was a short one. I would have definitely done a longer one. Spending a few months in their family, in their life, in a small town in Paraguay, just a kid from Phoenix who didn't know anything.
mhm,
That changed everything. It changed everything. And
uh,
in some ways, I feel like my poet self has actually never recovered. I just like,
well,
oh,
I
okay,
mean,
I just want seeing the world.
then maybe that's when you became a seeker, a traveler, and you've been that way ever since.
Yeah.
And, I would suggest that maybe you don't need to decide, with any finality what you are for where you're gonna be. Maybe you just continue to roll with it, and just let that be your
This is
life,
it. Yeah,
you
I hope so.
know? I hope
Hmm.
so. Um, what do you think
Is it
about
NZ
yeah,
politics there? Is that a question?
yeah. Do you wanna take that one?
Sure. Um, that's a great question. The current shift of democratic norms here in New Zealand. I mean, this is the tension. I had a I was speaking to I'm in the PhD program at Vic, and I was speaking to some of my cohort there about um, last fall. I wrote a piece about the election here. We all did. And, I was describing it to a very smart Kiwi writer saying, oh man, November, like that was a pretty apocalyptic election in the States. And she looked at me and said, well, we had an apocalyptic election here too. There's this really interesting tension about scale and a sort of American narrative drama around politics. We are right now consumed in the massive change that is happening in the United States. Absolutely consumed by it. New Zealand is going through a similar thing. New Zealand is
Mhm,
going through a similar thing. We have a right wing coalition running the country now. Most Americans remember it under Jacinda. Jacinda had a couple terms. Terms here are only 3 years. I don't think the Democratic backsliding and erosion here has been quite as bad as in the States. In the States, feel legitimately worried about 26 and 28, whether or not they will take place in any meaningful way.
mhm,
We got one more year here in New Zealand, these 3 year short terms, and I don't think, knock wood, that I'm worried about that rolling as a free and fair election. So that's the simple version of it. But it is true that there's been huge layoffs in the government. There's been very ambitious attempts by the hard right party here to not just write some laws, but radically remake the entire societal contract here. And they've not been shy about it. So there was a big bill to sort of rewrite the treaty between the Pakeha settlers and Maori, which is the founding document of the country, tried to rewrite it, got shut down. I was amazed by the vigor with which it got shut down.
Mm,
There's a current one now that they've proposed that's basically just strip out the whole idea of regulation from the government. They'd love to make it a total libertarian free for all.
mm,
So there's a big echo between the two. And Kiwis will often say, "Yeah, we're doing the same thing as the states, we just do about 10 years later." There was a video rental store in Masterton when we moved here 5 years ago. So there's this time shift. It's happening. But right now, it all feels mishmashed and sped up and worrisome. So I guess I am trying to follow the lead of Kiwi writers on Substack and my Kiwi friends and everything. Um, Show some humility, learn, study, um, but but be honest about what's going on. And to Americans from the outside looking at New Zealand, you know, these trends that are happening all over the world.
mhm.
Portugal just sent in a right wing government. They're happening in New Zealand.
And the xenophobic party just rose to be the second largest party in the country,
Wow.
up
Wow.
staggering growth in the last decade.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's
So,
dismaying.
right. And so, I mean, as you say, the United States leads the way both for good and for ill, right? So I think
Yeah,
if the United States is able to get away with certain things that used to be unthinkable, they will become thinkable everywhere.
they do. And honestly, David Seymour, who's the right wing guy here, whatever you think of him, I don't think much of him. He's much smarter and better at this than Trump. Um,
Mm.
so I'll give him that. He's a hell of a politician. Um, yeah. Well. Do you have any questions? Yes. Oh, Chefa. That's the right wing party there.
Shake, yeah, Shega is the right wing party. It's yeah. I mean, this is maybe a message to Americans. You can leave the United States to get away from what's happening there, but don't be surprised if you find it happening somewhere else.
Yeah. Hmm.
Unfortunately, so
This is the feeling that I had when we were in China. We were teaching in Shanghai, and we were there from 2013 to the pandemic.
uh,
And New York University, this was we all forget this now, but high globalization, right? When New York University opened a campus, they opened one in Abu Dhabi, and then they opened one in Shanghai. And the whole idea at the time, Jenny was hired as the inaugural faculty for the one in Shanghai. We go out there. The whole idea at the time is like cosmopolitanism. We're expanding. The higher education market in China is going to be huge, right? At that point, China was sending 300,000 students a year to the United States. And it's a huge untapped market, the world's largest middle class. So the American universities are like, let's go do this. We're all just coming together, right? Of course, 2013 was also when she came to power. And at the time, there was this whole narrative about how he was going to be more open. He was not in the end. And so we went through this transition there. So when we started, I I felt it was my duty as a lecturer to teach against cosmopolitanism, to tell the kids that the school was kind of blowing smoke a little bit. What I was
mm,
saying earlier, like you're an embodied human. You live a certain amount of time in certain places. You can't be everything to everybody. The world is not that I'd like to give a world of Coke. That doesn't exist. And that's not how human life works. By the end of it, when they've got the camps up in Xinjiang, right? And they are, I mean, it's getting nasty. You realize post Trump, post Brexit, you realize how beautiful and how absolutely countercultural the idea of cosmopolitanism is, as flawed as it may be, as blind to
mm,
privilege as it may be. as self-congratulatory as it may be, it's actually in the world historical run of things, really weird
Yeah.
and really kind of cool that way. And so I think we're seeing this again now as the walls go up everywhere.
Yeah.
Um,
I think what we're seeing now is that many of the ideas that characterized the mid part of the 20th century were extremely unusual and might have been a fluke. And now we're moving
yeah,
away from it. So
yeah, the dark
it's
times.
very sobering, and I think we're going to both lose too many subscribers if we say these things too much. Let's try to end
Whatever.
your note.
Yeah, we are what we are. Yeah. Should we just talk about
So,
like food?
do you think that? Do you think? Okay, yeah, sure. Food. Do you think that American food really like the preferences for food that you learned as an American define you in any way?
Mexican food, yes.
I mean, that's the thing. If you ask Americans what's the best food in America, they say Mexican food, which I think is
They're not
lovely,
wrong. They're
right?
not
It's like
wrong.
if you ask a Brit, what's the best food in Britain? They say curry, you know.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
so I think actually food is a good argument for cosmopolitanism, right? There's
Yeah.
that's one of the
I
things that I
think
really like.
food. Okay, well, so this is, but it gets into the "Are you going to die American?" Right? And I wrote about this a while ago. Waking up to the realization on one hand, like, okay, well, if things really go south in the states, or if my kids really, I mean, they're doing well here. What if we stay here longer term? I'm going to go to my grave having eaten less enchiladas than I would have wanted.
Right. Yes, I loved it. I loved it when you wrote
Just
that.
on a straight, like, mathematical list, you are
Right.
on Earth for such a finite number of time, the number of really, truly good margaritas that I will drink, and there aren't any here in New Zealand, um, will fall short of a pretty average life goal for a kid from Phoenix who's lived in Texas. And like, this is like basic.
Yeah.
And that is, I can't describe that as anything but heartbreaking. And so then it's like, we'll just fucking move home. Like,
Well,
hi
there's
guys, I'm
another answer there, Dan. I mean, my response, and this is maybe how I'm different, would be, well, better learn to make a good margarita then.
I, I know how. I know how. Limes
You
here in New
know,
Zealand are
just
insane.
yeah. Well, right. Find a way to import the tequila. Find a way to get everything you need, and you know, do it yourself.
Yes, and I support that. When living in Marfa, in a small town in West Texas, people used to ask like, "Well, where do you get your Thai food?" I said, "Well,
Mm.
we don't. And if you want it, you make it yourself." And
Yeah.
and that's cool. But part of what you miss is the effortlessness, or the fact that it's in the air. The
Yeah.
fact that you call a friend and be like, I mean, I love visiting Austin because it's like, which margarita do you want? And we just go meet there, you know?
Yeah. And there's also something about the culture in which it's embedded, right? When you go out for a margarita, there's a
Yeah.
certain kind of place you go to, and
Yes.
you enjoy it in that place at that time with the people that you know there, and it's multidimensional, right?
Yes. Yeah.
The
It's a complete
multidimensional margarita.
experience. Yeah. And if you don't have it, or if it's just reduced to you in your kitchen, and I've done this, we had some friends over here and we made enchiladas, and using the chilies that we brought home from the last trip to the States,
Yeah,
and they were delicious. Great, and now we're out of those chilies. I'm gonna buy some next time we go. But yeah, and that's wonderful, and it even feels even more ritualistic because you're trying to replace something that isn't there. And but that's what I guess you miss. Yeah. Yeah. The daily effortlessness, or the sort of the no big deal about it. You make margaritas here, it's a big deal. And so what I'll miss, not in New Zealand, would be, going to the coffee shop here. The coffee here is awesome. It's
mm,
excellent. And getting a coffee and a pie here. That becomes like your daily, the daily rituals, right? I know you have them in Lisbon. It's like, this is the thing I can step out of my door and go get and not really think twice about, but it's actually quite pleasant. And those are the sort of lived experience things in a place that you will miss. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I think part of the
I
trick.
did. I did. Thank you for the comment. I did save the seeds. I've got a little jar of the seeds right here. I'm such a
Nice.
lousy gardener that I'm not sure I'm going to get the big pasillas out of a wet New Zealand garden. But okay, citizen of the world. What do we got there?
You want to take that one first, or do you want me to?
Sure. What do you? It's kind of over my face. It's kind of hard to read. The
It is.
concept of viewing yourself as a
What
citizen
do
of
you
the world.
think of the concept? What do you think of viewing yourself as a citizen of the world?
Well, it's a messy phrase. It's a messy phrase. I mean, what's the Theresa May line? Is if you're a citizen of, well, she didn't say citizen of the world. She said anywhere and nowhere, or no everywhere and nowhere.
Yeah.
Um, Citizen of the world. I think it's kind of cheeseball because I think those words don't match up well.
Mm,
As I said, I spent a lot of time in a self consciously global university. It got to be a joke. The word global everywhere, a global citizen, global citizen. So citizen implies a contract with a polity, with a group, that it just doesn't happen on a national on an international thing.
right.
I think your contract with your fellow humans on a global scale is more spiritual than the word citizen, right? It's just
Exactly.
the human, being to being, soul to soul, where citizen implies this sort of contract. And a citizen of the world, I think, as commonly used, implies somebody who's found a cheat code to the contract and can flop about. As somebody who I feel like I've done some version of that, right? I like the mood behind it and the spirit behind it. I find the actual phrase not the best.
I agree. I agree. I have gone on record as thinking more or less along the same lines as you. In one of, I wrote two essays that were both under the series title "The Good Migrant," and in one of those two essays, I forget which one, I talked about that phrase and why I don't like it, and it was more or less what you just said. So
So, what's another phrase? I mean, what do you call yourself?
I just call myself, I'm just me, right? I
Yeah.
am me, and I am, I mean, we both contain multitudes, right? I think of you as kind of a modern day Walt Whitman, and I do think you contain a shitload of multitudes. So,
Yeah.
you know, um, I think we're all really complex creatures. I think we're all really complex, and we, to the extent that we've been influenced in any way by other cultures or other places, we are somehow, global, international. I don't know what the right word would be, but I think I would say that travel broadens you as a person. I think expands your horizon and broadens who you are,
Hmm.
because it really, really affects your ability to think in more ways about
Hmm.
experience.
Hmm.
And so, does that make you a citizen of the world? No, but it makes you, I think, a more multifaceted individual.
Hmm.
And so that's why I recommend travel all the time to anyone who can do it, because it's always going to lead to mind expanding experiences, even if they're minor, right? You're always going to end up seeing things in new ways.
Is does it?
Even if you have negative experiences, it's going to
Yeah.
still going to change the way you see the world.
I I am a little. I mean, there's that Agnes Callard piece in the New Yorker last year, sometime that against travel, which is was a bit heavy, I thought, but I do have some of that suspicion. And as you move into this sort of hyper tourism, over tourism world that Elizabeth and Lucy were talking about, and places like Portugal, Barcelona are experiencing. That's not really the case in most of New Zealand, in some spots, I suppose. Uh, my faith in the ability of travel to teach you these things declines.
Mm.
I think this is a an old lament, and there's been different versions of it for years and years and years. That everything's the same now. The travelers, you just see lousy copies of the same thing, but
Yeah. I
it
was
is
in
different.
Paris. I was in Paris about a month ago, and I walked past an American family who were announcing that they were on their way to Pizza Hut. And I thought, "Man, you go to Paris and you go to Pizza Hut? Really?" But that's
Yeah.
the thing. That's a choice, right? It's a choice that you make. You can go to all these different places all around the world and find a Pizza Hut if that's what you're looking for. But if you're looking for more authentic, more, different, more local experiences, you can find those too. I
You
think.
can, to a point. I mean, when we were in Shanghai, we watched Shanghai go through the change.
Mm,
Uh, And now Shanghai is a big, enormously huge and fathomless city, and I'm very fond of it. And there's plenty of local authentic experience and local authentic experience without the quotes. I mean, there's all kinds.
Yeah.
But we were there at the stretch when the government had made the decision to eliminate street food. They were continuing a decades-long project of tearing down every single old building in the city and replacing it with a high-rise mall. This is a common big Asian city thing, right? As
Mm,
older cities, older buildings get all replaced. So in the time that we were there, the the little street stalls we go get breakfast, the little food street near us, all vanished, all got torn down.
mm,
The only place to get a lot of that food, wonderful food, was now in mall food courts. You would go in, that's what replaced it all. Now, some of this food was still excellent, and those mall food courts were full of Shanghainese just living their lives. I mean, it wasn't inauthentic, but at the same time, it wasn't that different from the sort of physical experience in other places. This has changed now, I'm sure, because Starbucks is on the decline in China. But when we were there, it was being their expansion. At one point, we could walk to 9 Starbucks from our apartment in Shanghai.
really?
Yeah, and then of course, then they started delivery. So then we didn't even have to leave the house. You could just have a nice guy in a moto would bring you a latte in the morning. Um, that is limiting that difference that you're going to experience
Mm,
traveling.
yeah.
I mean, that's just the truth of the modern setup, right?
Unfortunately, I would say unfortunately, some people would say that's great because what they want, they want their mocha latte wherever they go.
Yep.
But I would say that, if what you want is a variety of experiences, then it makes it harder to achieve that. But,
Yeah.
you know, well, Dan, we've been talking for over an hour.
We have.
We've got
This
an
is amazing.
amazing,
Rosie, hi
amazing
Rosie.
lot
Rosie's
of
there too.
people who've come here.
Yeah.
I'm extremely gratified and pleased that so many people have dropped in. Thank you very
Yeah, this
much
is great.
for coming. And this will be posted on both of our Substacks probably
Yes.
within the next day. And um so and we're getting some last minute messages about Costco and things. Um
Costco.
yeah.
Is
Thank you
Costco
very
here?
much,
Okay,
Ben.
Costco's not here yet. I don't think. Are they coming?
This has been really great. I've enjoyed talking
Yes.
to you. I've enjoyed thinking about this stuff with you, and I think we should do it
Great
again.
to make the connection. Absolutely. We're totally down to do this again. This would be fabulous.
Thank you very much,
Get
and
some
thank you to
rest there. It's the end
Alex.
of the day over there in Portugal. Go to
Yep,
bed. The day's just
yep.
starting here in New Zealand.
Getting close to my bedtime here. I hope you'll have a good day over there.
Yeah, you too, man.
Take
Thank you so
care.
much. All right.
Thank you. Bye,
Bye
everybody.
all. We end it. Do I push the X?